Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. In this episode of my wildlife photography series, I'm just going to answer a couple questions. The most common question I received is if I ever use a monopod or a tripod. And I do use a monopod sometimes, and I will have an episode where I'm out using a monopod and give you some of my thoughts on how I go about utilizing one. Now, I usually don't use a tripod. The main reason is where I shoot around here, most of these nature preserves are around 300 acres. And they don't really have the type of wildlife that would be conducive to use a tripod. Meaning if I was shooting at Yellowstone, you have elk and bison and you have herds of animals, and you could, pretty much plant your tripod in one spot, get a long lens, and you could shoot all day. Here, it's more nature trails and things like that. And although you could use a tripod, it's just hauling it around. I don't find it necessary. Now, the other question that kind of went along with that is, do I use a gimbal head? And since I don't use a tripod, I really don't use a gimbal head. I don't own a gimbal head. And I know that really a gimbal head is essential to really a lot of different types of wildlife photography. So what I'm going to do is below this video, I'll have a link. I'll find somebody else's video on the internet that explains a gimbal head and the advantages of using one. The main thing about a gimbal head is you're able to mount a camera with a real long, heavy lens at the center of gravity for the rig. And it will be perfectly balanced. And the way the gimbal head is designed, you could move it vertically and horizontally very smoothly. So it's almost, no, say almost, it's almost as though you're not on a tripod. You have a lot of angle of movement and freedom of movement using a gimbal head. They're pretty expensive. To get a decent one, you're talking upwards of $1,000. Now, if the opportunity ever came and I was able to go to like Yellowstone or someplace like that, I will get a gimbal head and I will take my tripod with me because it would be more conducive for that type of nature preserve compared to the things around here where it's more fleeting, birds flying around and things like that. The other question I kept receiving too was about my camera, and I had kind of mentioned that it isn't the perfect camera for wildlife photography. And again, this is my opinion, but it's a really high resolution camera, all right? Everyone knows D800E, D800, D810. You get a really big digital negative. They're very high resolution. The problem is the high ISO performance isn't that great with this camera. Now, I'm not sure about the D810. I think it's similar. But because of that, I'm limited at what I can shoot. I can't really get my ISO much higher than 400, or I get so much noise it really starts to affect the definition of my subject that I'm shooting. Also, because it's full frame, I have a 500 millimeter lens without a teleadapter, or teleconverter, I'm sorry, I don't have the great reach that, a real, that you would prefer, let's put it that way. So the thing I find is my shutter speeds, because I'm usually at ISO 100, my shutter speeds are usually around 1/250th of a second. That usually isn't fast enough for anything that's moving. Birds flying across the sky, birds flying over the marsh, shutter speed's not quick enough. I need a higher ISO. I turn the ISO up on this camera and I start to lose definition. So optimally, if you're looking for a new camera or you're looking for a camera for wildlife photography, now I'm not a gearhead and I'm not going to tell you a specific brand or anything like that, but I suggest you go to all those gear-oriented websites, and you'd like something, in my opinion, if you're a weekend warrior, not if you're shooting for National Geographic, but if you're a weekend warrior and you have limited funds, is get a crop sensor camera that has good resolution and has good high ISO performance. If you could find that combination, that would be optimum. A bonus would be is if it has a high frames per second when you're on continuous shooting mode. That way, if you are shooting birds flying across the marsh, you could shoot off maybe, 7, 10, 12 frames a second, and you'll really have a better chance of getting a really good image because of that. Now, like I mentioned, with this rig, I'm limited. I really can't shoot that. The best I could do probably is 1/250th of a second, and it's not going to be fast enough. So this isn't the optimal rig to have. Also, the lens is awesome. It's got great image stabilization, but it is an f5.6 lens, so if I put a teleconverter on it, I lose some stops of light there. So it's limiting in that aspect too. So I do what I do. I mainly get smaller animals, birds, things like that, deer, and those are the images that I sell. Really, to do it properly, if I were to do it, I would get a really good crop sensor camera that has, again, a great high ISO performance, yet very good definition. Now, finally, the last question I kept receiving is people were really kind of amazed that I was able to handhold this lens and get really sharp images, and it's really not that hard. First of all, this lens has great image stabilization. It really is awesome. Also, what I found is most people don't practice holding a long lens or getting stable shots, non-shaky shots. And I really can't emphasize this more. You have to practice. Go in your backyard, take your biggest, heaviest camera with your biggest, heaviest, longest lens and practice. And everyone's going to do it a little different. I'm going to tell you how I do it. Now, you might have noticed, like in the video for that, the GoPro video for the last wildlife photography video I did, that when I saw a bird, let's say you're the bird, that the GoPro, when I was ready to shoot, went to the side, and the bird all of a sudden was in the corner of the frame. And that's because I don't shoot straight on. I get a wide base by spreading my legs apart, and I stand kind of sideways to what I'm shooting, and I turn my head and shoulders towards what I'm shooting. And I bring the camera up and I keep my elbows really firm and tight to my body and hold the camera up to my face. I lightly press the eyepiece into my eye. Now, I emphasize lightly. I don't smash it in and smush it in. Just lightly. It just gives me that little bit extra kind of stabilization point. And that's the way I shoot. So the most important thing, I think, is keeping your elbows in. You don't want them flying out or anything, or even one out and one in or anything, both in. And that's how I found that I get steady shots. Now, everyone has different body types, and it might not be comfortable for you to do that. That's why you have to practice. Go in your backyard and just take some different shots. Try it different ways. There's a lot of different photographers that probably shoot straight on. It's more comfortable for them, and they do better that way. Try it. Try all different ways and see what works for you. But the main thing is to practice. You really just have to practice. So that's it. I hope that cleared up some of the questions about the camera and why I don't think it's a great camera for wildlife photography, and about the tripod and monopod and gimbal head. I really do appreciate you guys watching my videos. Thank you very, very much. All right. Next episode, we'll be out in another nature trail taking some pictures. I'll talk to you guys soon.